The rain drummed against the windows of Morrison and Associates as we gathered for the reading of Dad's will. I sat in the back corner watching my brothers Marcus and David adjust their expensive suits and whisper calculations under their breath. They'd been doing math all week, dividing Dad's $2 million estate between themselves while assuming I'd get some token inheritance, maybe enough for a down payment on a modest house. They only knew. "Before we begin," announced Harold Morrison, Dad's longtime attorney, "I need to address some unusual circumstances regarding Mr. Thompson's estate." Marcus straightened up, his wedding ring catching the light. At 35, he was the eldest and had always acted like Dad's heir apparent. He owned a successful accounting firm and lived in a McMansion with his wife Jennifer and their twin boys. "Unusual how?" David asked, leaning forward. At 32, he was the middle child and had followed Dad into real estate development. His company, Thompson Development Group, had been struggling lately, and I knew he was counting on this inheritance to keep it afloat. I remained silent in my simple black dress, the same one I'd worn to Dad's funeral 3 days earlier. While my brothers had delivered eloquent eulogies about Dad's business legacy and their plans to honor his memory, I had simply stood by his casket, holding Mom's hand as she wept. "The unusual circumstances," Mr. Morrison continued, opening a thick folder, "involve the actual ownership of Mr. Thompson's assets." "What do you mean, actual ownership?" Marcus demanded. "Dad owned Thompson Industries, the family home, the lake house, and his investment portfolio. We've seen the documentation." Mr. Morrison adjusted his glasses. "That's where things become complicated. 3 years ago, your father entered into a series of transactions that fundamentally changed the ownership structure of his assets." David frowned. "What kind of transactions?" "Sales," Mr. Morrison said simply. "Your father sold everything." The room went silent except for the rain and the ticking of the antique grandfather clock in the corner. "That's impossible," Marcus said, his voice rising. "We would have known. I handle his books." "Actually," Mr. Morrison said, "the sales were conducted through a third-party holding company. All transactions were legal and properly documented, but structured in a way that allowed your father to retain operational control during his lifetime." I felt a familiar calm settle over me, the same feeling I got during board meetings when competitors thought they had me cornered. 3 years ago, when Dad first got his cancer diagnosis, he'd called me into his study for a conversation that changed everything. "Emma," he'd said, "I need to tell you something about your brothers." Dad had discovered that Marcus had been embezzling from Thompson Industries for 2 years, hiding the theft through creative accounting. Meanwhile, David had been using the family name to secure loans for increasingly risky real estate ventures, putting the entire family legacy at risk. "I don't want to destroy them publicly," Dad had told me, "but I can't let them destroy what I've built either." That's when he'd proposed the sale. Not to strangers, but to me, the daughter who'd quietly built a $3.2 billion investment empire while my brothers assumed I was struggling to make ends meet as a freelance consultant. "Mr. Morrison," David said, his voice tight, "who bought Dad's assets?" Mr. Morrison looked directly at me. "Phoenix Capital Holdings, represented by its CEO, Emma Thompson." The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus and David turned to stare at me like I'd suddenly sprouted wings. "That's impossible," Marcus whispered. "Emma doesn't have that kind of money." "Actually," I said, speaking for the first time since we'd sat down, "I do." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Phoenix Capital Holdings is a subsidiary of my investment firm, Horizon Enterprises. We manage approximately $3.2 billion in assets across technology, real estate, and manufacturing sectors." David's face had gone pale. "You're lying." I slid a document across the table. "This is the purchase agreement for Thompson Industries. Signed 3 years ago. Purchase price, $1.2 million. Marcus grabbed the paper, scanning it frantically. This says Phoenix Capital Holdings purchased the company assets, not the company itself." "Correct," I said calmly. "I bought the machinery, inventory, client contracts, and intellectual property. The empty shell of Thompson Industries was left for Dad to maintain operational control until his death." I slid another document forward. "This is the purchase agreement for the family home. Purchase price, $450,000. And this," I continued, placing a third document on the table, is the purchase agreement for the lake house and surrounding 40 acres. Purchase price, $350,000. David was now openly sweating. Why would Dad sell to you and not tell us? Because, I said quietly, he discovered that Marcus had been stealing from the company, and David had been using fraudulent loan applications with the family assets as collateral. Marcus shot to his feet. That's a lie. I pulled out another folder. This contains copies of the altered financial statements you submitted to avoid tax obligations, Marcus. And documentation of the $200,000 you've taken from company accounts over the past 3 years. You can't prove that, he said, but his voice was shaking. I can actually. Dad installed new accounting software 6 months before he got sick. It tracked every transaction, every login, every modification to financial records. I turned to David. And these are copies of the loan applications you submitted using properties you didn't own as collateral. The FBI's Financial Crimes Division would be very interested in these documents. David slumped back in his chair. Emma, please. I was just trying to keep the business afloat. By lying to banks about assets worth over $1 million? Mr. Morrison cleared his throat. Perhaps we should continue with the will reading? I nodded. Please. The will of Robert James Thompson, Mr. Morrison began, is quite straightforward given the recent asset transfers. To his son Marcus Thompson, he leaves his personal effects and the sum of $25,000, contingent upon completion of financial restitution training. Marcus's mouth fell open. $25,000? That's it. To his son David Thompson, Mr. Morrison continued, he leaves his collection of books and the sum of $25,000, contingent upon completion of a business ethics certification program. David was staring at the table, his hands clenched into fists. To his daughter Emma Thompson, Mr. Morrison read, he leaves his gratitude for saving the family legacy and his confidence that she will use the assets she now owns to honor the Thompson name in ways her brothers never could. The room was silent except for David's shaky breathing. There's more, Mr. Morrison said. Mr. Thompson included a letter to be read aloud. He opened an envelope with Dad's familiar handwriting. To my sons Marcus and David, by the time you hear this, you will have learned that Emma now owns everything I built. This was not a decision I made lightly, but it was necessary to protect our family's future from your poor choices. Marcus was shaking his head in disbelief. Marcus, your embezzlement cost the company nearly $200,000 and could have resulted in criminal charges. David, your fraudulent loan applications put our entire family at legal and financial risk. The letter continued. Emma spent her 20s building one of the most successful investment firms in the region while you both assumed she was failing. She never asked for help, never demanded attention, never sought credit for her achievements. When I needed someone to trust with our family legacy, the choice was obvious. Mr. Morrison looked up. The letter concludes, I hope you will use this as an opportunity to learn humility and rebuild your relationship with your sister, who has shown more wisdom and integrity than either of you have demonstrated in years. Marcus finally exploded. This is insane. Emma, you can't just steal our inheritance. I didn't steal anything, I said calmly. I purchased assets that Dad needed to sell to protect them from your embezzlement and David's fraud. We'll contest this, David said desperately. We'll get lawyers. I smiled sadly. David, I own a $3.2 billion company. I have an entire legal department. And more importantly, everything I did was completely legal and properly documented. I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the rain-soaked parking lot where my brother's luxury cars sat next to my practical sedan. But here's what's going to happen, I continued, turning back to face them. Thompson Industries will continue operating but under new management. The employees who've worked there for decades won't lose their jobs because of your mistakes. What about us? Marcus asked quietly. You both have choices to make, I said. Marcus, you can complete the financial restitution program Dad specified, pay back what you stole, and apply for an entry-level position at Thompson Industries. You'll start at the bottom and work your way up based on merit, not family connections. Marcus looked like he might be sick. David, you can complete the business ethics program, and I'll consider bringing Thompson Development Group under the Horizon Enterprises umbrella as a subsidiary. But you'll be a junior partner with strict oversight until you prove you can operate ethically. And if we refuse? David asked. Then you take your $25,000 and find your own way, I said simply. But I won't prosecute for the embezzlement or fraud, provided you both stay away from any business involving the Thompson name. The meeting ended with my brothers sitting in stunned silence while Mr. Morrison gathered his papers. As we prepared to leave, Marcus approached me. Emma, he said quietly, I need to ask you something. What? The money Mom needed for her medical treatments last year. The experimental therapy that insurance wouldn't cover. I didn't answer, which was answer enough. That was you, wasn't it? The anonymous donor who covered everything. I picked up my briefcase. Mom's health was more important than anything else. But we thought Dad was paying for it. He said he had special insurance. Dad was protecting her from worrying about money while she fought cancer, I said. Just like he protected the business from your choices. David joined us. Emma, why didn't you ever tell us about your company, your success? I looked at my brothers, Marcus in his $1,000 suit, David with his expensive watch, both of them having spent years treating me like the family disappointment. Because you never asked, I said simply. You saw what you expected to see. The quiet little sister who didn't drive a flashy car or live in a mansion. You assumed struggle instead of recognizing strategy. Strategy? Marcus asked. I built my company by living below my means, investing wisely and focusing on substance over appearances. While you both were buying expensive toys and impressive offices, I was acquiring assets and building relationships. I walked toward the door, then turned back. Dad saw that. He understood that real wealth isn't about what you spend, it's about what you build. 3 weeks later, I sat in Dad's old office at Thompson Industries, reviewing quarterly reports. The company was thriving under professional management, employee morale was up, and we just landed our biggest contract in 5 years. Marcus had enrolled in the financial restitution program and was working in the company's accounting department under strict supervision. He drove a used car now and lived in a modest apartment, but for the first time in years he seemed genuinely focused on honest work. David had been slower to accept reality, but after his wife threatened to leave him when she learned about the fraudulent loans, he'd finally enrolled in the ethics certification program. Thompson Development Group was now a subsidiary of Horizon Enterprises, focusing on affordable housing projects instead of luxury developments. Both of my brothers were required to attend weekly family dinners with Mom, where we slowly rebuilt relationships that had been damaged by years of assumptions and poor choices. You know, Mom said one Sunday, your father would be proud of how you've handled all this. We were sitting on the porch of the family home, the house I now owned but where Mom continued to live rent-free for as long as she wanted. I hope so, I said. He always said you were the smartest of his children, she continued. Even when you were little, you thought 3 moves ahead of everyone else. I just learned to be patient, I said. To build quietly and let results speak louder than announcements. Mom smiled. That's exactly what he said you'd do with the company. Emma will make it bigger and better than I ever imagined, but she'll do it so carefully that no one will notice until it's already done. 6 months after the will reading, Thompson Industries had expanded into 3 new markets and increased revenue by 40%. The original employees had received bonuses for the first time in years, and we'd established a scholarship fund for their children. Marcus approached me one afternoon as I was leaving the office. Emma, he said, I wanted to thank you. For what? For not destroying me. You could have had me arrested, could have ruined my reputation completely. Instead, you gave me a chance to earn my way back. I looked at my older brother who'd lost weight and gained humility over the past 6 months. Everyone deserves a second chance, Marcus. But only if they're willing to do the work to earn it. I am, he said. I'm learning more about business in this entry-level position than I learned in 10 years of being handed everything. David joined us, still wearing a suit but a much more modest one than his previous wardrobe. Emma, I owe you an apology. You don't owe me anything, David. Yes, I do. We spent years thinking you were the failure in the family. We never bothered to ask about your life, your work, your goals. We just assumed. You assumed what you wanted to assume, I said. It was easier than acknowledging that your little sister might be more successful than you were. A lot more successful, Marcus added with a rueful smile. I looked at both of my brothers, thinking about the conversation Dad and I had had 3 years earlier in his study. Your brothers aren't bad people, he'd said. They're just lost. They've had everything handed to them for so long that they've forgotten how to work for something. Do you think they can learn? I'd asked. With the right teacher, he'd said, smiling at me. Someone patient enough to let them fail and wise enough to help them rebuild. Standing in the parking lot of Thompson Industries, watching Marcus get into his used Honda and David climb into his practical sedan, I thought Dad had been right. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone isn't money or property or inheritance. Sometimes it's the opportunity to discover who they really are when everything else is stripped away. As I drove home that evening, I thought about the will reading 6 months earlier, about the shock on my brothers' faces when they learned the truth, about the long journey we'd all taken to get to this point. Dad had entrusted me with more than just his company and properties. He'd entrusted me with his sons' futures, with the responsibility of teaching them lessons he'd been too gentle to enforce himself. It hadn't been easy. There had been arguments and resentment and moments when I wondered if I should have just let them learn the hard way. But seeing Marcus find pride in honest work and David discover the satisfaction of ethical business practices made every difficult conversation worth it. My phone buzzed with a text from Mom. Sunday dinner at 6. Marcus is cooking. David is bringing dessert. You're bringing yourself. No excuses. I smiled. Some things were more valuable than money or property or even justice. Family was worth rebuilding even when it meant starting from scratch. Especially when it meant starting from scratch.